On the Hardrocker Sports Network from KTEC 91.3, this is Hardrocker Huddle, your podcast home for South Dakota Mines athletics.
Welcome to the Hardrocker Huddle. This is episode 26. Today our guest is assistant football coach here at South Dakota Mines, Bo Montgomery. Thanks for joining us today. Just kind of getting right into it. You were born in Boulder, Colorado. What was that like growing up there, and what was your family life like?
It was a really neat experience. I was born in Boulder and moved a little south down to the Front Range area in Lakewood, and that's kind of what I remember most as a kid. Living close to the mountains and everything that kind of Colorado has to offer in the outdoor scene and stuff was really cool, and really was able to develop a lot of lifelong friends kind of growing up in that area and doing a lot of sports as a kid, which was awesome.
Sure, and then you eventually moved to Hawaii. What was it like, kind of getting used to that? And then, what age were you kind of at when you moved over there? And what was your, high school life like in Hawaii?
Yeah, so I moved there when I was about 14. It was obviously kind of a big shock to everyone in our family and friends and everything like that to make the move out there. But if I remember correct, I think I've had a pretty good attitude as a kid about it. It's always tough when you're leaving around that age because, again, I had a lot of friends I grew up with, went to high school with for my freshman and sophomore year in Colorado. So, that transition was challenging. But at the same time, when you're a kid and you hear you're going to Hawaii, you kind of embrace that and kind of got really excited about doing the move out there with the family. That was a lot different, and then getting to meet a whole new group of people. So I think, one thing I feel real fortunate about growing up is just being able to meet a lot of different people, different cultures, people from different areas. And Hawaii is kind of that melting pot of people that were similar to our family that moved in. So it wasn't like I was in a high school out there with everyone that was born and raised there. So there was definitely some transplant families kind of moved out there, so that was neat.
At an early age, what kind of, initially got you interested in sports? And as a younger kid, what kind of sports were you initially involved in?
Yeah, well, I really looked up to my dad. I know, like a lot of kids, dad and mom, both were athletic people, both like to do a lot of different stuff, from mountain biking to hiking, to swimming and different stuff like that. So actually I think my first, I guess I could call it kind of non-traditional sport was biking, and that was kind of my dad's background. So got into BMX kind of young, and then before long, when I was about 5 or 6, got into the football and basketball and baseball and kind of hammered those 3 sports down. But really, I think looking up to my dad and watching a lot of professional collegiate sports with him, really kind of drew me to sports in general.
Sure, and once you got kind of towards high school, what were those sports that you started to kind of focus in on at that point?
Yeah, it was still really those core group of sports that I did as a kid. Football was always the big one to me. I can't really say for sure, what drew me to football more than maybe other sports. But back then it was kind of like, well, football's the fall sport, and then had a lot of fun doing that, and then boom, you get in the winter and it's basketball time, and then get in the spring and summer and it's baseball. So I really tried to focus as much as all I could on to the sports that I was participating in at that time. But I think professional football was something that I really admired as a kid watching. So I think that's what kind of attracted me more to football than anything, was just my passion for watching college and NFL.
Yeah, and you had some success. You lettered in all 3 sports, but also you won a league championship in football. I have down here 05. What were some of your greatest memories in high school? What were some of the maybe lessons that you took with that you still use today.
Yeah, well, it was a unique situation moving out there, going into the summer of my junior year of high school, meeting a bunch of guys on a football team that I didn't know, and just like I had just come from previously, they had a strong bond, and a lot of those players had known each other for a long time. So I was a little bit of an outcast, but again, the great thing with sports is they were accepting and understood that I was going to be part of the team. Once I kind of got past that and got going with the guys out there, the school I initially enrolled in out there for high school was a fairly new school, so it had only been around for 8 or 10 years or something like that. So everything sport related to them was pretty brand new. So our senior year, 2005, we were able to capture the school's first championship within our conference, which was huge, and there were some teams in our conference that were kind of powerhouses and had won multiple championships, and it was kind of a big deal for our school, and kind of led into some other championships that we had in basketball and other sports as well. So I feel real fortunate to kind of be part of that school's kind of foundation for that championship and what we were able to do as a team. But also at the same time, I recognized when I got out there that there was a lot of successful student athletes that had graduated before me in that school's time, which was really impressive. Again, just being a newer school, and some football players that had gone on to big time Division I programs, which is obviously impressive coming from Hawaii at that time when it wasn't quite the household name of players that it is kind of currently today in the sports scene. So that was really, really cool for me, and also really kind of motivated me to be able to kind of see that I could possibly have a path that those other guys had laid down.
Sure, and then you mentioned that was kind of your senior year. When did your kind of recruiting process start, or when did you kind of think that college football was maybe something that was in the cards for you?
Well, it was always a dream of mine. It was always something my dad had, pushed me and believed in me to do, and was really fortunate to meet a great high school coach named Sam Papali and had a lot of college coaching experience. So, aside from the connections that he had across the country, he ultimately knew kind of the talent level that was needed to play at the college level. And so with me moving and my family moving and stuff like that, my recruiting did happen a lot later than maybe some. And so, really didn't start to kind of think that could be a possibility until really going into my senior year. So had a good junior season and got to play with a lot of good players, and then really realized, well, this is my last year, this is my last shot, so I got to put everything into it. So really started to just really pick up really after my senior year. So it was an exciting time.
Sure, and you wound up going to Weber State for 2 years. What kind of initially drew you to Weber State, and what was the experience like for those 2 years?
Yeah, at the time as a high school student, had never heard of Weber State. It was actually referred to by some as Weber State. So that's that mispronunciation has kind of gone away now with the success that Weber State has had with Damian Lillard coming from their basketball program and the success the football program has had in the last almost decade, competing for Big Sky championships and getting into postseason play. So like I said, didn't know anything about the program other than it was Division I, and my high school coach reminded me, hey, this is a very unique experience and very selective process. So if you have the opportunity and they're recruiting you, you have to understand how fortunate you are. So was able to really bond with the defensive line coach, Coach Shad. He was actually in his first year as the defensive line coach there. He was a former high school coach in Maui. So being a high school coach out there, he had connections with the high school coach I was with, and they had conversations and said, hey, why don't you take a look at this player I got who's a senior? I think he can play at your level, and I think he's a guy that can really help you out. And so we had conversations, and then I got to kind of know more of the coaching staff that was really being hired at that time, which the head coach was Ron McBride, a legendary coach from Utah, and had just kind of came off a long tenure at the University of Utah, very well respected, not only within the state of Utah, but really the Mountain West area. And he kind of had the philosophy of really trying to turn Weber State around, and he sure did that. So was fortunate to be part of his first recruiting class and Coach Chad's recruiting class, and so it was a special time.
Sure, and then after that, you wound up going back to your home state, or I guess not total home state, but somewhat home state in Hawaii.
Yep.
Obviously, that first year, probably some of the younger kids don't know about the 07 Hawaii team.
Yeah.
But they think of UCF, they think of some of those Cincinnati.
Yes.
Hawaii was kind of one of those teams that started that outside of Boise State, and that 07 year was one of those years with Colt Brennan. What was it like I know you weren't able to play that year, but what was it kind of like to just be on the sidelines and experience that season?
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. I was going to say, Boise State was kind of really that outside of the Power Five that is today, that kind of started that. But there was a ton of buzz, around the campus and the entire island, and it's one of the few schools that has no professional football team, really professional sports within the core group of sports, and so it's kind of like a pro team experience. You got a great fan base there, and they sold out almost every home game, and a lot of exposure. I remember Colt Brennan and a lot of his cast of receivers and offensive guys and some defensive guys as well were on ESPN shows and different stuff like that. So, it was a unique experience. A lot of students would turn out for games and come out. So it was really, really cool to be part of that team, even though, I had to sit out with transferring and everything. The timing of everything was really unique, and got to meet again a whole nother cast of teammates and friends.
Sure. And then obviously you finished your career up there. So you had 08 and 09, you played there. Yeah. Initially, I guess you went through some transition. June Jones wound up taking the job at SMU after 2007. I think Colt Brennan went to the NFL after that year.
Yeah. So
what was it kind of like to, I guess, initially go through that coaching transition? And then what were some of your experiences your last 2 years?
Yeah, well, as a defensive player there, I was happy to see Coach McMacken was retained as the head coach there. Had previously been the defensive coordinator. Had a lot of success at very high level of college football with the University of Miami and even within the NFL. So. Really felt lucky that he was going to stick around, and that really retained a lot of coaches on that staff. So even though maybe some of the outside noise was saying there's a big change with June leaving, and no doubt he left his mark there and did a lot of great things. But I think we were really happy as a team, as a program, that we were going to retain a great coach and try to keep what we did in 07 and keep that kind of going. And we knew we had a lot of talent still within that roster at that time.
Yeah, and part of that, too, is that conference was tough back then.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you had to deal with Boise State. Those were some of Utah State's glory years back then. Mm-hmm. Nevada was coming up. Yep. So that was a tough conference to win games in.
Yeah, and then you got to remember we had Louisiana Tech, and so it's like traveling across the world to go play them. And they were a great program that were always consistently kind of underrated. But yeah, that old WAC was. Again, it's every week was a challenge, and a lot of great atmospheres. Fresno State at that time, again, had still does to this day, but had a lot of national success, and we're ranked in the top 25 on several occasions when we played them. So, a lot of rivalries that were kind of built in, within our conference, within that conference.
Sure. And while you were kind of finishing up your playing career, When did it when did you start to realize that maybe coaching was something you would eventually be interested in, or what kind of drew you to that?
Well, I knew as a player, I had limited time as a player defensively at the Division I level, and was fortunate to play under some great players. And David Vicuni was a defensive end drafted in the third round by the Cleveland Browns, and we had numerous other free agents within my senior year in that 2009 class. I think we had 5 guys up front on the defensive line that were in NFL camps or drafted. So there was a lot of talent there. So I knew I wasn't those type of players, and knew I kind of saw the writing on the wall, and so I wanted to stay involved in football. Whatever I could do to stay in the college football ranks is kind of what my dream and passion was turning to. And so had those conversations with my position coach at the time, and he was great in saying, hey, you're going to have to kind of start at the bottom and work your way up like anything else. But if you've done football your whole life, this is going to be something that's going to be natural for you to do, and you just got to put in the work. So initially got into strength and conditioning and did that right away, kind of after my playing career, and I graduated, and that was a great experience. Just another facet of college football to see how that whole side kind of operates, and got to see and work with other collegiate teams too, which was a great experience. But after that ended for basically a semester, I knew that I wanted to try to transition to doing stuff on the field, and that was my goal.
Yeah, and obviously your first opportunity was still at Hawaii, as you mentioned, a strength and conditioning intern. What was that kind of like that first year? Is that tough at all? I mean, you're similar age to guys you played with. What was that kind of transition like to all of a sudden you're coaching these guys instead of their friends? Yeah,
it was a challenge, and obviously a lot of people I knew on the campus at the time. But I had great relations with the strength coaches out there, and I knew that maybe this isn't what I'm going to end up doing when it's all said and done. But again, I knew there's so many facets and different stuff within college football that strength and conditioning plays a huge part, just like it does today, obviously. So I kind of knew if I can get even a small sample size of really what this entails from programs and nutrition and different training exercises and stuff like that's going to benefit me as a coach, whatever I end up doing. So but yeah, it had its challenges, definitely. I think the good thing was I kind of had to force myself to understand that I'm not a student athlete anymore, and now it's about earning the respect of the people in there and trying to learn as much as you can too.
Sure, and then after that year, you kind of went over to a rival. We kind of already talked about Boise State. You had an opportunity at Boise State, recruiting specialist. Was that still when Chris Peterson was there, or had he already left?
That was his. That was obviously not known at the time, but that was his last year before he left to Washington. Again, similar to kind of the strength conditioning, I saw an opportunity in recruiting and said, well, here's a whole nother side that's not just coaching football, but that every coach at every level has to be good at and has to be proficient at it. So I said, well, this is an awesome opportunity, even though, like you mentioned, it was a rival and it was a little tough, walking in that facility day one and stuff like that. But I knew there was a great coaching staff there, and there was a ton that I could learn. And again, just meeting new people and new coaches, and really trying to soak up as much knowledge from those guys was again going to be something that was going to be great, not only for my resume, but just maybe open up other opportunities.
Sure, and at a D1 school like that, what does a recruiting specialist do? I'm sure you weren't the only. I'm sure there was a staff of people who were pretty much just focused on recruiting. Were you making calls? Were you a part of campus visits? What did that look like?
Yeah, I think I don't think there's a list long enough that I could probably make as far as what we did within a full calendar year or a full season. anything and everything we could do to help, the program. But like you mentioned it from game day visits which was a big part of what they did at that program, to unofficial visits, to helping with camps and summer camps, and then from the actual recruiting side of it, really trying to, number one goal that we always kind of made sure we understood it as a recruiting staff was, what can we do to help the full-time coaches to eliminate and ease the burden of all the details in recruiting. So, helping them plan their schedules of what high schools they're going to, really trying to organize and detail their recruiting lists as area coaches and as position coaches and coordinators, and a lot of great software even at that time that helped with databases. So really our job was to constantly, daily clean that up. And then back then, there obviously wasn't the resources there is today on social media. So, it was a lot of, digging through articles online and really finding out, okay, what are these recruits, saying about Boise State, and kids that we had maybe offered or potentially are offering, what is our kind of competition, and what are they saying about their visits, and as much detail as we could do. It almost would kind of be in comparison to like, gossip or something like that within celebrities, and trying to really dig into that and see what can we relay to these coaches to kind of give them an edge up against the competition that we were recruiting against.
So when you say like looking up articles, you're talking like articles on Rivals, articles that are now pretty much fan sites.
Yes.
But back then you were actually using them.
Yeah, back then it was just less communication overall with recruits. It was really, hey, a cell phone, and not every, 16, 17-year-old at that time had a cell phone, right? So it was, some of them had home phones, some of them had to go through their high school coach. So, aside from those conversations that, those position coaches and coordinators and head coaches maybe were having with them, they were also, going to camps and going to different, visits, and then exactly like you mentioned, those Rivals and 24/7, which have really changed, like you said, in what they are today, which back then it was purely kind of a ranking site, and then they would have a lot of stuff where they would reach out as media and try to kind of get the scoop and then make articles. So it was our job again to we had I think about 5 or 6 total personnel staff, underneath our director of player personnel and assistant director of player personnel. So we definitely had the resources, and so we just had to dig in and kind of create those reports to really try to help out, even though, just like everything, you never quite know how factual all that stuff is. But I felt like it was something that really the coaches appreciated.
Sure, and that was probably a pretty good place to get your start in recruiting, or learn the ropes, so to speak. That was a place that, had been through almost a decade of national success, and they were recruiting at a pretty high level at that point too.
Absolutely. And so even though I was titled as a recruiting specialist, I wasn't being paid or anything like that. I had an on-campus job within the university, and to me it felt like I was getting paid every day, because again, just the coaches I was able to be in the building with, as much as I could, I would make sure to try to find time to watch practice and see what they're doing from a football standpoint, and obviously attending all the games and talking with recruits and getting to know the coaches and getting to work summer camps and stuff, because I did express that interest to that staff that, I love the recruiting side of it, but, my goal is to become a coach, and they were great with that and very open. And so, yeah, it was a unique experience, and I just tried to soak it up every day.
Sure, and then after that, you went back to Hawaii. This was your first on-field coaching role, right? So that first year, you were just in charge of linebackers, and then second year was D-line. Is that right?
Yes, yep. So kind of went in there, and with Chris, Coach Peterson leaving Boise State, obviously they were in transition, and my plan was to really stay around Boise State and their program. And then a previous coordinator that I played under at Weber State was hired there as a defensive coordinator, Coach Kloon, who came from Utah State. So again, in that same conference of Hawaii and everything, everything. So he was a great hire, had a lot of success there at Utah State, and really went to him and petitioned, hey, what can I do to try to get on the field and help you guys defensively? And then really came to him with hey, this is what I had been doing this really last year at Boise State, and really felt like they were leading the conference and really on par with a lot of at that time Pac-12, Big 12, or Pac-10, I think, schools in recruiting. And so I think that was kind of my leg up to say, hey, we can get some of this stuff that we've done going here at the University of Hawaii because of the unique ways that they have to be able to recruit out there.
Sure, and I know you had some experience on the D-line. Obviously, you played D-line as well as some special teams. What are some of those maybe major differences to learn to be able to coach linebackers when you played D-line?
Yeah, well, obviously, the first thing you think about is coverage and understanding the whole scheme, and not just the linebackers, but the safeties, the DBs. We were very multiple defensively. We would drop defensive ends at times and different stuff as well. So a lot of different stuff that we had, from a schematic standpoint. And so really just trying to understand the big picture. And then from a fundamental and technique, really was fortunate to work with a great coach, Coach Govea, who had played years in the NFL, really just tried to get as much info from him as far as, the daily practice drills, the different habits that it takes to really be a successful college linebacker. But the great thing, just like you hear all the time, is there's so many traits and fundamentals and techniques that translate to all positions, defensive line, linebackers, DBs, whether it's leverage and tackling and eye discipline and all that stuff, just like you hear on the offensive side as well. So, and then just being able to see these older coaches and how they coach and the passion they coach with, and how they address their players and all that stuff was huge as a young coach.
Yeah, and you had some recruiting roles too while you were at Hawaii. Well, obviously having that role at Boise State was helpful, I'm sure, but what are kind of some of those, obviously that's kind of different worlds of recruiting, because at Boise State you're Midwestern, maybe West Coast. Yep. Hawaii, you're very different. So what are some of those maybe differences in recruiting that you had to kind of learn and then be able to make the transition?
Yeah, I think, the first thing was, our resources and our staff resources wasn't what we had at Boise State. So, everyone was going to have to do a little bit more within their role. We kind of just had the old school recruiting coordinator. And then, I kind of fell under him, and, tried to do a lot of the busy work, to allow him to kind of focus on the bigger items. But just like you mentioned, I mean, we had to really get dialed into a lot of the West Coast ties. Obviously, the state of California was huge for us, and had a lot of coaches that had lived there, coached there, knew a lot of the high school programs. But then at the same time, we had some coaches with some ties to Florida and Louisiana and different parts of the South. So, that's always a challenge when, again, you're so far away as a program, University of Hawaii, and there's so much good football there, to really how do you sell your brand and your program to kids like that. But I credit the coaches that went out there and met those kids, and then getting those kids on campus and really being able to show them how unique Hawaii is and how good the football is. Once we were able to do that, we were able to land some pretty darn good recruits nationally, not just from your typical West Coast schools, to really help out the program.
Yeah, one thing that I mean, just in my following of the way Hawaii is recruited and watching games and stuff, is they really recruit elite level athletes. Like, some guys might be 5'8", but they're just running, like Calvin Turner this last year. What do you think? Is that just something that Hawaii is really strong as a state with athletic type guys like that, or is that a focus that they have?
I would honestly say both. just like you would kind of imagine, Hawaii is full of bigger athletes that are really athletic. And, whether that's, if they fall under that Polynesian tree or not, you tend to find a lot of those kids that are, big frame, long, athletic, can bend well, and obviously those are typically kind of more your offensive and defensive linemen. And then I think the staffs over really the last decade have understood that those are going to be the guys to hone in state, but we're going to need, just like you mentioned, some dynamic athletes, some explosive guys across the country, and it's going to always be a challenge for a program like University of Hawaii to really maybe get the 6'3", 6'4" receiver that everyone's on, right? That kind of checks every box and is a no-brainer. So what are they going to do to try to offset that? And just like you mentioned, that's maybe finding a guy that's a little bit shorter, or something, he had an injury his senior year, or something happened along the way, and he might be just as explosive and just as good as the kid that's getting all the offers in the world, but he's undervalued a little bit. So I think they've done a great job through honestly, the multiple coaches, like I said, over the last decade, of finding those guys nationally, and I think that's the credit to the location of Hawaii and what Hawaii has to offer, and obviously the institution as well, in really attracting kids that really are up for going to someplace new.
Yeah, and some of those differences between getting recruited between a Power 5 school and a G6 school, it isn't necessarily about skill. Sometimes it's, hey, you're 2 inches shorter than. So a lot of it isn't necessarily athletic or skill. Sometimes it's height, weight too.
Yeah, and then you find some of those guys have a chip on their shoulder. They're willing to work harder than some of those other guys, and they're constantly working to prove people wrong. And Hawaii's had a kind of lineage of walk-ons as well within the program that have come on to do a lot of great things, within the college football landscape and even within the NFL. So, again, I think Hawaii's just kind of embraced those type of guys and have kind of made sure that every rock's unturned in the recruiting process to make sure they can go and try to find those guys that, maybe other programs can say, well, we have the resources to go find these other guys, or, locations as well.
After your 2 years at Hawaii, you wound up going over to Humboldt State University. Was there a connection that kind of drew you to Humboldt State, or why was Humboldt State the right fit at the time?
For me, it was just the transition from finishing, being a graduate assistant and kind of knowing, that I'd most likely probably have to leave Hawaii again to get a shot, at coaching. And with it being on the West Coast, and fairly, close with my wife still being in Hawaii at the time, I said, hey, I got to take this opportunity. And, that was tough because, they had just hired Coach Rolovich, at the time. So I was with him for a spring, and that was a tough deal because I felt that the staff that he got at that time was really good, and really enjoyed working with them, and kind of felt like, okay, this is another opportunity to get more connections, and do I really want to leave a place that I'm just getting to know these coaches? But I had a good relationship with the defensive line coach there, and he kind of said, hey, you got to go take your shot, and this is kind of just the beginning, and so you need to go be able to get what they call in the coaching world kind of your own room, and be able to get your own guys and go through the speed bumps that involves, and the adversity, and that's ultimately kind of was his advice to really, if you want to be staying in this coaching landscape.
Sure. And obviously, eventually, Humboldt State actually wound up closing, correct?
Yes.
So how big of a kind of blow was that after being there for 2 years? You're like, what do I do now?
Yeah, well, and you obviously hear rumors of it, almost, kind of after getting there. So, just like you hear all the time, you worry about what you can control, and until that day came when the program was shut down, we put everything we could into the players and the football program. But yeah, it was exactly like you said. It was kind of okay, well, what's next? Coaching isn't a deal where you can necessarily just pop online and go fill out an application and get your next job. It's extremely competitive, and it's a connection based deal. Was fortunate as a younger coach to still have some colleagues to contact and stuff, but I ended up heading back to Hawaii and really wanted to be close to my wife, being away from her for the time I was there, and figured I can do all my networking out there as best as I could, and was fortunate to really be there for a couple months before the job here at South Dakota Mines came open.
And who was your connection, so to speak, with South Dakota Mines, or what interested you about this school?
Yeah, well, I didn't know Coach Tink at the time, but I did know about the RMAC conference because we played some teams, Western State and Chadron State, at Humboldt. So I started to dig in obviously more into the conference, and then realized, wow, there's so many Colorado schools within the conference, which was an exciting thing for me. Just obviously being born in Colorado, and it was really the coordinator, Coach Levi Suinoa, and getting to know him. I'd worked with his brother at the University of Hawaii, and they came from kind of a pedigree of coaching family, and so they made the phone calls, and he said, hey, I got a coach that's just came off of a 2-year stint at a Division II, and he's looking for a job, and he's a defensive line coach, and it's kind of the position that was open at the time. So I didn't hesitate. I jumped right on. I told Coach Tink, hey, whenever you need me out here, I can get out here, and came out during the spring, and felt really, really excited to get back into coaching, even though it was a brand new area, and it was it wasn't really spring ball; it was winter ball. We were getting some cold temperatures at the time, but yeah, I embraced every moment of it, and kind of jumped right back into it.
Yeah, you mentioned Coach Tinker a couple times. He's actually done pretty well for himself too. I believe he's at Oregon now.
Yep.
Is he somebody you've kept in contact with and have a pretty good relationship with?
Yeah. He's he's a guy that obviously learned a lot from him, and every head coach you get to work under is always a little bit different, and so got to kind of meet him, and then after he left here, kind of being able to follow him to Central Washington, and then like you just mentioned, the University of Oregon. Once I kind of saw that pop up, I was really excited for him and his family, and he's a Pacific Northwest guy, so I'm sure he's happy to kind of be back in that region, and at a program like Oregon with a new head coach, and stuff like that. I'm sure there's a lot of buzz going on there, and just look forward to crossing paths again, within the future, and really be able to, talk with him a little bit more after the season and see how everything's going.
So your first 2 years would have been under him, and then your last two, obviously, under Coach Floor.
Yep.
What is kind of the transition like to be able to stay on a staff and then get adjusted to the culture differences? Not necessarily that one is bad, but just every head coach is going to have their own culture that they want to instill. Yeah.
It's just obviously getting to know Coach Floor when he came on board, and getting to kind of look into his background and the success he's had, and was just really impressed by his length of tenure at his previous institution, and in the coaching world. I tell people it's almost like dog years, right? So you're at a place for 5-10 years. That is a long time within coaching football nowadays. Was really impressed for his length of tenure that he had there, and then getting to obviously see the success they had in the national championships and all that stuff. Was really impressive, and then getting to know his family more and his ties here. Really kind of this being the hometown team that he grew up with, was really exciting to me, because I felt, well, that's going to be a great fit for the direction that I think the program needs to go, as far as getting tapped into recruiting around this area, and everything Coach could talk about this program, even though he would be a first year head coach here, would be something that he's familiar with the area.
Sure, and I guess this would affect Coach Floor more than you, but that first year with a new coach, having a COVID year, only getting to play 4 games, how hard was that on you guys as a staff?
Yeah, it was challenging, but I constantly felt more for the players and what they were having to go through. So, I couldn't have too many days where I felt sorry for myself. But it had its challenges, no doubt, just like everywhere, just doing so much stuff on Zoom. And fortunate that we have a lot of guys, and still do obviously on our team that, handled it well and controlled what they can control again. We were just really excited to hear that we were going to have a 4-game season because obviously kind of the national deal was, well, no season. And then, later on that Division I stuff got back going. But for a while it was kind of becoming apparent that, hey, college football probably won't exist in 2020. So hearing that we were one of 10 Division II schools to play, we only played a 4-game season, which, now looking back at sounds like, wow, that's such a short season, but we were able to actually practice and go through, majority of the fall. So even though we weren't having those weekly competitions, I really felt our guys developed a lot within that year, and a really credit to probably the success that we had going into 2021.
Yeah, sure, and you did have quite a bit of success, going into that, I guess, first regular year for Coach Floor and the whole staff. You obviously had a winning record. You did some things that hadn't been done in a long time. Back-to-back wins against Black Hills State. A win on the road, which hadn't been done in a little over 15 years. What are some of those things mean to the program going forward?
Well, I think first you got to credit the seniors because we always talk about, hey, it's your guys' program first and foremost, and kind of the standard that they set in. Our motto was buying in, right? Buying into to what our goals are as a team, which was having a winning season, beating Black Hills at their place, and then getting that road win, at Adams State as well, against them. So. I credit, like I said, them, and then those seniors being able to really get the younger guys and the rest of the team to follow in line with kind of what we were doing as a team. So, that was exciting to see our guys kind of complete the mission with those goals that we set.
Yeah, and obviously it's important to always be continuing to grow.
Yep. So
you had some growth in the fall, and then what was the biggest areas of growth you felt were in the spring, being able to have a full spring again?
Well, I think, as football coaches, we always have a lot of time after the season's over to kind of reflect on everything we did. And defensively, we looked back and really felt like, it was almost a tale of 2 seasons. And it wasn't really even the teams we were playing. Some of the top offenses within the conference, we held to some of the lowest point totals and did a lot of good things defensively. And then there were some games and some halves and some quarters where we did not play good team defense. And so we overall just, talked about, hey, we got to be more consistent in what we do. Anytime you finish 6-5 and you're near 500, it's apparent that there's still some lack of consistency at times. So I think for us defensively, it's understanding is we all work together. We're not going to be perfect as a defense, but we can't afford to kind of have those some of those halves, those quarters, and even if we look back to a game maybe where we didn't come together and we didn't play kind of hard rocker defense. So I think that's the biggest thing we kind of address going in the spring, and then understanding that within our roster and our personnel that we got a lot of guys that have played a lot of football within the defense. So we kind of set the bar and the standard to say, hey, you guys are well aware of the conference, the teams we play, the personnel. You're now more familiar with the defense with Coach Winter coming in, and really for a lot of our guys, again, he's still getting those 2 seasons with 20 and 21 to understand, hey, this is what we're going to do from a schematic standpoint. But it all comes down to execution and kind of those base fundamentals things on defense. Again, tackling and getting pressure on the QB, not giving up explosive plays and stopping the run. And so that's our biggest challenge. We really feel if we can do that consistently, we can. There's no doubt we can be one of the top defenses in the conference.
And I think the proof is kind of in the pudding there. The last, 3-4 games of the season, gave up 10 to end the season, shut Black Hills State down, one of the best passing offenses in the league. I mean, you had 5 interceptions just from one guy over 2 games. So those last, really 3-4 games, that last third of the season, you saw what the defense can do when you're getting that consistency. So how important is that to be able to point to and say, hey, this is what we should be doing all the time?
Oh, yeah, and exactly what we did. Again, we kind of broke that down, and, we really brought that forward in recruiting, right in December when we had official visits. We kind of put that up for those incoming players and said, hey, this is this is 2021 in a recap, and this is what we can do going forward in 2022 if we can become more consistent and play for each other and shore up a couple things. So it's exciting for us that we took the steps, I think, in spring, from day to day and every practice to do that, and we understand that it's got to come from up front. From getting pressures first and foremost and pressures on the quarterback to help out our back end. And then when those plays are there to be made, our back end's got to make those plays. So, that's the biggest thing we always challenge is, hey, we all work together. And then, the big picture is one thing I think we did a good job in 2021 is, we play complementary football. And so the offense controlled the clock and took care of the football. And we tried to get off the field as much as we could. And if you can do that, in my opinion, a lot of that's, what some of the best teams in the conference do. And it's not always going to just be boiled down to talent. It's going to be about playing complementary football. Yeah,
and then what do you feel like are those next steps to be more consistent, to be more complementary, to not only have a better season, but to eventually, become a consistent RMAC contender?
Yeah, and that's definitely, I think, where we're, trending to for these goals for the fall. We're Coach Floor's meeting with the seniors now on a regular basis this summer, and we're kind of putting together, those bullet points. But again, I think it goes back, first and foremost, when Coach Winter got hired, he said, hey, it may sound cliche, it may be old school, but we're going to stop the run. And as much as college football is spreading out and, becoming more multiple and offenses are passing more, we always say, the worst thing an offense can do is run the ball and impose their will, and it's coming and you can't stop it. And when teams can do that, they control the clock and they wear you down. And
it almost breaks your spirit too, as a D-line, as a linebacker, and then everything else.
Yeah, it's demoralizing. And then we said, hey, we're going to lay our hat and we're going to say, hey, first and foremost, that's what we're going to stop. We don't care if we're going to go face the number one passing offense. That still needs to be something that needs to be done. And then second, again, we say that the front end and the back end work together. So it's our job. It's not necessarily just looking back at the sack totals and saying, well, where do we compare? It's about QB pressures and QB hits, and if we can do that more consistent, we're going to get quarterbacks that are going to not be able to sit in the pocket and step into throws and feel that pressure. And we have the guys in the back end that if we can do that, they're going to be there to make plays. And again, it goes back to our personnel and where we're at with guys playing a lot of football, and those guys now understanding, kind of nuances and those details within the defense to make sure they're in the right spot.
All right, I don't have anything else for you today. Thanks for joining me, Bo. This has been the Hardrocker Huddle. I'm Josh Van Valkenburg-Gernert, signing off.